Okay, so we discussed Solo's model and we discussed the endogenous Roma's model, and we've compared the differences. But still, we still keep coming up with the question of, okay, we now understand about capital accumulation. We now understand about accumulating technology, and how you can accumulate technology in your economy is if you have a labor that is involved in the R&D sector, labor that is coming up with new ideas every period. This is going to increase your technological rate, your technological progress, or the rate at which you accumulate technology, which when combined with your capital accumulation, you should observe your economy experiencing exponential growth and entering sustained economic growth. But the one thing we don't understand yet is, all these models have been making the assumption that labor spends a fraction of its time accumulating skills. But how do you accumulate skills? What are the determinants of skills, or being able to accumulate skills in the economy? So this final model that I chose as well, it's a model of skills and skills diffusion and globalization as well. So in this model, they also open up remember, both models have been closed economies. They've been producing sort of a homogeneous good, and so there's no need for trade. But in this one, we open up the economy to show why being an open country is also just as important. Not only the fact that you've got these good internal factors that are working in your economy, but you cannot be, as the mercantilists assumed, be a self-sufficient country. You do need to interact with the rest of the world. So we then try and explain the mechanism of globalization. So according to Roma's model, we know technology comes from ideas, which is embedded in our population. The next question we want to ask is, why is technology used in some countries more advanced than in other countries? So here we're now acknowledging the fact that actually some countries seem to have better technologies than us. It's not that, everyone has access to the same levels of technology. Some countries actually do have better technologies. Why is it? And why is it that, these countries invest in technologies, in advanced technology? And how does technology transfer across countries? What are the incentives that will allow people that are coming up, or countries that are coming up with these new technologies, what will incentivize them to share their technologies with the rest of the world? So some of these questions we answer in this extension to Endogenous Growth Theory framework by Jones and Vollrath. What they do is they add an avenue for technology transfer by first endogenizing the ability to use technology. So they are trying to understand the skills accumulation of the labor, and then they capture the role of globalization in these various dynamics that are playing out. So again, we start with our production function, and we also have our capital accumulation equation. So that's similar to all the two growth models we've looked at, what determines change in capital. So that's similar. What has changed here is your production function. So now your production function is determined not only by shares of capital and share of labor that's producing output, but it's now determined by the skilled level of the labor. And this H is capturing the ability to use the technology in the economy. So it's now about how skilled is your labor in being productive in the economy. And then it's also incorporates the openness aspect of the economy, where M is capturing the imported goods into the economy. And these imported goods are embedded already with technology. So they are intermediate capital goods. They are goods that need a skilled labor to be able to use them. So if you do not, so you can import as many technologies as you want into the economy, but if your labor is unable to use it, then it's not going to contribute to the economy. And sometimes what you find is, poor countries will import these technologies, realize that they don't have the skills. What do? They import the skills. They import the skills, which unfortunately is then a disadvantage for your labor because, you're not upskilling your labor, and sometimes it might, you might have to, you then might find yourself in a situation where you're having to let go of your local labor, so that you can put in skilled labor, but the skilled labor is coming from outside, right? And then this is the initial level of skills in your economy. So I'll quickly explain the production function for the accumulation of skills, because this is the innovation in this model. Your skills. So your age defines how well the labor can use the technology. Your skills evolve over time because of the initial level of skills, the individuals, your people's initial skill level in the economy. Your skills evolve over time because of the amount of technology that's available in the economy. And this particular parameter here is the amount of time your people are spending accumulating skills. And in this instance, you do not need to accumulate skills in a formal environment, such as going to school, university. It can also be non-formal education where you learn by experience, or maybe if you come from a farming family, you've observed your parent, your father, your grandfather using the land, and you've learned that skill as well. So these are the type of skills. So it doesn't have to be formal. It can be both formal and non-formal. And what this equation is telling us is that it is harder to learn to use new technology or capital goods with technology when you are close to the technological frontier, right? So if your country already has a high skill level, whatever returns you're going to get from new technology is going to be quite small. So you will grow, but it will be at a marginal rate. However, if your country has low initial, you have low skill level, then the economy is going to grow faster because the rate at which you'll be accumulating skills whenever there's new technology is going to give you significant returns. So if you think about it, it's so much more easier for us now to use laptops, computers, than it was 30 years ago. Right? So I think I was in high school when they first introduced the computers. It was those big ones with the black screen and the green writing. And I took it for my O-level. I was in Form 4 and I thought, okay, I can get away from doing history. In hindsight, I should have done history. And I said, I'll do computers. I failed it. So I've got an E on my certificate because it was that hard. It was that hard to understand how to use this new technology. It was completely new in poor countries in Africa, right? But now, I can change my laptop. I know exactly what I have to do. It's so much easier. Same thing with cell phones. When cell phones were first introduced, it was very hard. It took us a long time to understand how to use this. Now, someone can buy you a cell phone and you just transfer and you carry on. So this is what they're saying, that we have the skill level to use computers, we have the skill level to use cell phones. So if you introduce a new laptop or a new cell phone, the return to us, it's so marginal. It's going to be marginal, right? But now go into a country where they've never had this type of technology. For them, the returns of using the cell phone is going, wow, I can now call. If there's an emergency, I can make this call. Or, with the laptop, I can Google, I can do my research. The returns for them will be exponential. So this is what the model is saying. Yes, sir.
There's something I'm thinking of here, and I'm hoping we can maybe arrive with what you are saying. How would you use these models or formulas to explain the inefficiencies in our government and argue for a reduction of the number of employees that we can, since there's an argument that the South African government employees is limited.
Yeah, it's involved.
Yeah. So is there a way that we could use this to argue to show how we use the skills that we have in the country, keep them within the government, so that we can get the return from our investment and build an efficient government?
So I probably could argue with you and you'd understand, but when you try and explain this to our politicians, they're going to, they'll probably say no. Because, I mean, I think it's what, I can't remember who it was saying we need to, the people that we are putting in power should be educated and should understand the implications of the choices that they're making. And I always joke with my class that I think all politicians should go through a course of introduction to economic growth and development. And they must, if they just understand just the fundamentals and the foundations of how you can get your economy to start growing, they might then understand why it's important to have policies that create incentives for innovation or to invest in your economy, right? And then they might understand the value of skilling, of upskilling your labor. And they wouldn't be so scared of new technologies coming into the economy, because they would know that, okay, no, this new technology is good. All we need to do is to make sure we bring up the skill level of our population so that they're able to use the technology, and we will get the returns from this technology, especially if it's a technology that has not been in the country. So the returns are going to be a lot higher. Yeah.
And they will be able to negotiate well.
Exactly. You'll be able to negotiate those contracts very well. Yes.
There's another point, for example, in the public sector, we'll find that not because it is hard to transition from the manual way of doing things to ICT-related activity, to say like every data that is within certain department is stored online. But now there is a major intention to keep those, manual papers, so that if there's an important document, you can always take it, so that there's no evidence to say like such agreement or such procurement was processed. That is why maybe we don't have that transition from the manual way of doing things to the digital sort of. So say like every employee should be trained and everyone should, there's no drive, because maybe like there are those personal interests, I think, as well.
And I will give you an example. Like in South Africa, we take for granted the fact that you can apply online for your documents, like a passport, and now they're making it really even easier. You can go to the bank to apply for your ID. In Zim, trying to get a Zimbabwean passport, it's still manual. I mean, I've heard that they're trying to electronize it, but as of when I got my last passport, which was 2024, I still had to go queue in a line, get a physical form, write on it. If you make a mistake, you have to go back and pay a certain percentage, a certain amount to get another form. Fill it in, sign, they stick my picture, and then they will give it back to you, and they will say, okay, now you can go to Zim and submit it, right? Now I hear they are now allowing, you can now submit at the embassy here. But before, you had to find somebody to take your application form to Zim, submit it for you, then your passport would come out, and then it has to be sent back. But can you see that process, how frustrating it is, because the government doesn't want to invest in a simple technology which is being used globally to electronize the national documents that are a necessity for their citizens, right? Why? That's the question. Why are you not, I've been asking this question, like, why are we still doing these antiquated processes of applying for an ID or a passport?
For example, you'll find that those documents that has to do with society, they will electronize them, just like how the public can always use a digital platform to do application and stuff. But you'll find that the data repositories for the department, for example, we find that sensitive information is not stored maybe like on cloud, but they just keep documents so that they can always have access to them to remove them should they, maybe Mr. So-and-so, Director so-and-so is implicated in such,
Not only many countries, and I even like now they have the e-visa as well for a lot of the countries. And if you're on a South African passport, you're very fortunate because a lot of the European countries as well allow you to actually apply for e-visas electronically, right? But I mean, for me on my passport, I have to go through the process. But my brother-in-law, they are based in UK. So they are now citizens of UK, and they wanted to go to Australia, and they need a visa for Australia. Everything was online. They did everything online, they paid it, and within 24 hours, they had their visa. Efficiency. Right? You can upload your documents. I don't understand places where they were like, oh, no, bring your document, make sure it's certified and all of that. Why is it that other countries will say, upload your document, a copy of your ID, a copy of your certificate, and they'll process it online and you can come and collect?
Let's give them the benefit of the doubt.
Okay.
Given where it comes from. I'm sure they know about these systems, such that investment on them is not easy. There are life-threatening issues that they have to prioritize. I'm saying this because not so long ago, I was studying in Scotland.
Yes.
Now we are an educational excursion to Portugal. I also had to travel all the way from Scotland down to Manchester, England.
To England, yes.
Get to the consul office of Portugal for my visa to get to Portugal. And that was 2010.
That was 2010.
So, and those were first world countries.
Yes. So it's let's give our countries for the benefit of the doubt, or maybe like what we said, that there's not enough capital. There's not enough capital to invest in these things, so they have to prioritize, the health sector and other sectors. So that could be something else I thought of as we're discussing this is there's also that fear, because we've had this manual system for so long. There's the fear that you're going to replace people, and already unemployment is high in the country. Can you afford to, become more technological at the expense of these people? Where are you going to put these people that are losing their jobs?
Just to add to that, in as much as these difficulties exist, I think that in certain spaces within Africa, there is that intentional effort to sabotage such structural change for private ulterior motives. I don't know how prevalent it is here, but in West Africa it's very prevalent. So you've got a system where they've got these e-systems where you submit, make your application and get your documents. And then you have people intentionally hacking into the systems to bring it down, because some of them are at risk of losing their livelihoods, not in terms of computer replacing jobs, but in terms of corruption. She understands it well. So different things thrive Like you want to get a passport, you get to the office, you got to pay certain people.
Yes, yes. Okay, so those niche markets that have been created will disappear.
Like my government was successful in changing the tertiary institutions examination to the online format. So now you want to go to a university in Nigeria, you do your exam online and you just get your results. But it was a whole lot. Before then, you had corruption, you had people cheating and stuff. And then they tried to replicate the same thing for our passports, just like Z. The site was there. But then you have people cry, and we are very good hackers. We are good with computers. So we have those realities as well.
Same thing when Ghana tried to started the introduction of the digitalization, but we've gone far ahead and it's been success. Just that at the initial
Stages, there were these nitty gritties. Yeah, and talking about those niche markets, you had your hand, Kuda? Did you have? Okay, I'll come. So just talking about the niche markets again with my Zim passport, when you go to the embassy, if you take your picture, don't bother taking your picture in Kodak, at Kodak or anything. When you get there, they will tell you it's wrong. Go around the corner there. There's a person. That guy is making. The last time I was there, the queue for those photos, I was like, no, this is black market now. This is a niche market that's been created. Okay, yes, Fatima.
Thinking about like the Go Durban BRT, because there are discussions and debates that like the government gains from the taxi industry, and because it's technology, right? And they're saying that they don't think it's going to be implemented because other people gain
from the
taxi industry.
Of course. And if it's a threat to the taxi industry, there's going to be a lot of pushback on that. Yes, Kuda.
No, that's excited by the idea of how it impacts the niche markets.
Yes.
And I think the biggest niche markets is in the border control and what do you call this? When they're excited due to
Yes.
immigration.
Immigration.
Customs, yes. I think most African countries have got borders.
Yes.
So at the moment you put a scanner, I'm going to be losing my life because so I don't fight.
Yeah,
fight.
definitely. On boards, they had nothing to do. They needed to survive. They needed to survive.
So I don't know. I almost felt one because they told me that they wanted an English teacher.
Wow. Really?
Yes, so they got an email with talking English and I said, my friend and I were going to pay you so much. And that was the time in Zim was collapsing.
Yes, exactly. A good opportunity, yeah.
I wrote to them, they sent me forms, they said, and then they said, I will pay you so much. And then at the end, then they said, the stage at which we are now, you are now supposed to pay this amount. And I said, no, why don't you pay it there? So I said, no, this has to be paid directly by you from there. Then I said, send that money to me, then then I can pay. Yeah. Then I said, no. Then they said, actually phoned it. It was arguing me in good English now. Yeah, this time was saying, okay, good English.
I wanted to go back to that interim perspective. So, in as much as South Africa has advanced in terms of technology, what I find strange is that when you are in a foreign country, as a South African, once you apply for a passport, it takes about a year.
Really?
Yeah. I don't know how is it possible. But when you're here in the platform, it should take about.
Yeah, it takes a very short time. I'm always jealous of my South African colleagues.
Take about a year. So I don't know if it's a matter of priority because.
But I wouldn't have assumed that because it's going through the SA embassy or consulate in that particular country. Because I think for me, I don't understand why, as a government, you want to deny your citizens a human right such as your national ID. Why are you making it difficult for your citizens to apply for national IDs, especially the ones that are outside of the country? But again, there could be political issues, incentives there as well, especially, your diaspora, right?
If you look at it as well, the amount of time that is wasted because of using manual systems, it's lost output for the country, you know. And I think they know it, but just is done deliberately. But at the end of the day, we want to develop the economy. But if we're not putting the necessary systems, saving people time, people spend almost days queuing for documents and all that. It's lost.
And it's lost. It's a loss of productivity on that day that you spend that whole hour, the whole day, you know, waiting just to apply for a national ID. Yes.
I just wanted to add to what Lakmo is saying. So Lakmo is saying there is nothing like limited resources. It's mostly something to do with the political will. But I think I beg to differ because I mean, as much as there is no political will to utilize everything, but still governments are facing limited resources and they have competing needs. Because mostly when the budgets are being done, the ministry is given limited resources. Then for those limited resources, we have competing needs within the ministry. Let's say, for example, the Ministry of Health, we have to improve the maternal health, we have to improve the pandemic preparedness, all of those. Then someone comes and say, oh, we need the system to be digitalized. But we are saying children are dying. We are saying mothers are dying. We are saying maybe we are expecting another COVID. So you are weighing
prioritize
what does the system has to do with not having drugs. So you prioritize something which is attached to the human life.
Excuse me. Yes, sorry, Virginia.
Would you say like the pandemic like sort of like shifted us to move to this? Because I'm thinking of UNISA, like before the pandemic, you would have to go and write at a certain venue. So the institution would hire like venues for people to write exams. But like after the pandemic, they never went
back to, you still write online. Okay. All right. Well, I mean, the pandemic definitely did introduce more opportunities to work from home online and to also learn online. I think it came at a time when a lot of the countries were not really prepared for that type of sort of digitalization, especially online learning, right? But surprisingly, I must admit that, especially, well, I can only give context of South Africa because I'm in the academia media. We were able to transition it wasn't a smooth transition, but during that year, we were able to transition to learning online. We did a report with my colleagues during that, or just slightly after that period, to find out how the students whether the students preferred online to face-to-face learning. And we ran an experiment on our first year, I think our first year students, which is the largest group. And surprisingly, a lot of them said they preferred face-to-face learning. And the reason why was because with online learning, there were data issues, infrastructure issues. So some of them were in Eastern Cape, Northern Cape, and it was very difficult for them to access the platforms, even though I think most universities negotiated with all the big data companies, Vodacom and all of them, to offer subsidized rates that the universities could use, and we were giving that. We had a platform where it was free access. You didn't need to be connected to something to access it. But still, for some of them and a lot of the students, guess what? Well, they didn't have the laptops. So again, universities had to purchase a lot of laptops for the students that needed them, right? But it comes back again to resources. This was only possible for your rich universities that had the savings. What about your disadvantaged universities? And now what you see is those years or cohorts that are now the COVID-19 cohorts that are now coming into, well, I think we're now almost over with them because it was 2023, 24, 25. When they came back to face learning, yeah, the quality of education was really bad. It was low. It was really low because learning online was just not, maybe, I don't know if the word conducive is, or it was something that they were not used to it. So it was difficult for them to learn. And also our assessments, we had to try and make them, online online assessment types. And this is a lot of people that have, you write your question because you know that the student won't be able to copy and everything. But with online, you didn't know if two students were sitting together writing the exam, right? You didn't know if they had their chat GPT, you didn't know if they had their textbook next to them, right? So a lot of our questions had to change, which I think we've tried to keep and to make them more application than where they have to, So like with me, I mean, if I'd asked them to solve the model, they had the textbook to literally go through this. So I knew that question everyone was going to get right, but I had to bring in a question where I said, well, okay, now using Solo's predictions, apply it to this case study, right? To see if they're thinking, if they understand, so I had to adapt the way I was asking questions online, and I've tried to keep that. But again, it was this whole transition was maybe smoother for your richer universities than for your more disadvantaged universities. Yeah. Go down.
Oh yes, I was just thinking when my colleague here Abigail was talking about resources, governance. Yes, they are limited, like any other government, but priorities seem to be misplaced, particularly in African governments. We have bloated governments. They could have at least 15, 16 ministries, but sometimes you have 30 ministries. So, and that means you're taking the few resources that are being shared amongst 30 ministries, which could be avoided. One, and then also among those ministries, you have deputy ministers, you have all these other people who need cars top of the range, So yes, we have limited resources, but with those limited resources, what are we doing? When they go to foreign trips, 200 people attending a UN meeting. Okay, anyway.
Yeah. What are we doing with our limited resources? That is the question, really. Because if we do have the resources, ideally we want to see the greater returns from the few resources that we have, so that we are able to continue investing or to have savings as well. If you think of countries that have natural disasters, Haiti, when it was hit by the earthquake, I mean, they're still recovering from that, and that was years back. They're still recovering. The floods in Mozambique as well, These are countries that have limited resources. They don't have savings or enough savings for them to be able to spend in recovering from these natural disasters. And so these become those external shocks that push a country permanently out of its steady state, or and then they're on a lower balanced growth path for a long time, and they're struggling to catch up or to grow fast enough to get back to that original steady state. Okay, so if we just continue with this model, so we explained how skills evolve over time. It's about the time you spend getting the skills, the amount of technology that's available in the economy, and the individual's initial skill level, right? And a country, now it's not only about the country growing as it learns to adopt and to use these new technologies domestically, so you're increasing your age, but it also grows by expanding the number of goods that it is importing, because you can also get skills, you can also import technologies, you can import skilled labor as well, right? And that M can also be foreign direct investment, right? So these can be your multinational companies that are opening factories in your countries. If you think about the car manufacturing sector or industry in South Africa, you got BMW, Mercedes-Benz, Ford. These all have plants in South Africa. So those are multinational corporations where, because South Africa is open and they allowed these investments to come into their economy. So using those three equations, right, you can solve for the steady state output per worker. And again, you can see it's a extension of Solo's model, and then you have there the additional steady state property. So for this model, countries that are richer are the ones that invest in physical capital, right? We all know that from Solo's model. They spend more time accumulating skills so that they can use or they can adopt advanced technologies, not only the technologies that you're creating within your own economy, but you can also adopt new technologies from outside that can interact well with your economy, right? So you can be importing. So if I give an example of maybe these multinational companies that are opening, you open your factory in South Africa, you hire the local labor, you are skilling them in the technology, and at the same time, you are also importing the inputs from the mother country, which you're going to use to produce the final good in South Africa, and then you're going to sell it to the economy, or you're also going to export it, right? So this is what the model is saying, is that countries that invest in the labor spend more time accumulating skills, then you are able to use, to create, to be innovative and create your own technologies, but you can also use technologies that are coming from outside. So the more open you are, you can import more intermediate capital goods, and you can also have increasing levels of technology, right? So you can increase your progression towards the technological frontier. So these are the steady state predictions of this model. How does it hold up to data? Well, I looked at, education data is it's very difficult to get a good measure of human capital, but I took gross secondary school enrollment and our GDP per capita, and the correlation, you can see that higher levels of secondary school enrollment are associated with higher levels of income per capita. And you've got your usual culprits, right? Your developed countries are here, US, Denmark, and then you've got your usual culprits here. Somalia is here, Burkina Faso, Myanmar. Some of these countries are sort of coming out of conflicts as well, so you have to remember that that can also impact the ability of this to increase that if you've got other issues taking place in your country. So political instability or any type of conflict is going to affect the returns from human capital, from physical capital accumulation. Yes, ma'am.
I just want to understand that considering that imports are beginning to grow, why is this model expressing that expansion of imports without literally anything about exports?
So this model is specifically talking about so it's talking about how being open allows you to import technologies that can help you to produce goods. So whether you then decide as the country to export that good, how you are going to use that good within your economy, the model is not talking about that side. So in this particular model, they're interested in the technologies that you can import and how those will interact with the internal factors. And the imports, and it's not just any import, the imports you are bringing into your economy are technologies, new technologies. And remember, this model is specifically to understand how advanced economies grow. So they're saying that the advanced economies, how they grew was that they were open to, they invested in their human capital, they skilled their human capital, and they imported goods that were necessary to increase the production of goods and services. And then with that, if they were using those technologies, local and imported, to produce a good that they would then export at a higher price, or if they were using it to produce domestic goods and goods and services, and either way they were growing their economy. So it's the assumption. I know what you mean. Yeah, I understand but that's the assumption of the model, right? They look at imports. And I think what's interesting as well is that the aim they're also saying is it's not only goods, but it's also your companies that are setting up in your country, because those companies that are setting up in your countries can create employment. And when they create employment, those companies that are also setting up in your economies are also involved in the R&D, right? So they have research and development, which means, and remember what we said, the more researchers you have, it's going to lead to more ideas. So these companies are coming in with ideas that can be used internally to help the country grow. So they're just saying that, don't be too closed, because you can also learn from others.
Okay, so in other words, one can say that the exports are being treated like a constant that is not saying much about it, such that those imports are meant to boost the growth, but in other words, nothing about exports.
They don't mention exports here, so we can assume that they are holding all other factors constant, and these are the factors that they want to isolate from the model to explain how being an open country and skills accumulation can help the economy grow.
Yeah, to what your explanation just highlighted, the holding other factors constant. That means what I wanted to argue based in this manner, I assume it is a hold constant.
Yes, yeah. So, for most of these growth models, and that's why it's a theoretical model, right? You're trying to simplify a complicated situation, right? We haven't even included institutions in this. We haven't included a lot of other factors in this. But because we just want to isolate key factors that these economists felt were the critical factors of growth, this is how they developed their models. But we are assuming that we are holding all other factors constant so that we can understand how the changes in these factors will affect economic growth. And that's why I was saying we might find Somalia here, we might find some of these countries here, but if you then think, and here's South Sudan, but if you think that these countries have come out of conflict, right? But we are holding the fact that they've come out of conflict. We are holding that constant. And so the assumption is that while they've got poor enrollment rates, and so it follows that they've got low income per capita. But if we don't hold conflict, then we can actually say, but maybe the fact that they're not getting any returns from their enrollment rates is because they were in a conflict. Who's going to send their children to school when there's conflict? In Nigeria with the Boko Haram, a lot of families were keeping their girls at home. They wouldn't allow them to go to school because it wasn't safe. They were being kidnapped. So you can imagine that if you then look at the gender gap in education outcomes, the women are going to have a lower education outcomes. But that could be one of the reasons that may explain during that period. Okay, so that was education. And then trade. So the predictions say if you're an open economy, you will have higher income per capita. This is trade. This is your exports plus imports as a percentage of GDP. And again, it seems the predictions of the model hold, right? Your usual countries that are trading more, They have high income per capita, although you do find quite a cluster here as well, which is quite interesting. But typically, the countries that are above this side, it's all the countries that are more open. They are, and South Africa is right here. I just saw it here. So there's South Africa here. So the predictions of the model hold, but the problem with this, so while the predictions hold, it does bring up more questions, right, about this model. For example, it says individuals in developed countries have invested a lot of time over years in learning how to use these advanced technologies, while individuals in developing countries have invested less time. So the question is why? Why is it that this model is observing this or making that assumption that advanced countries spend more time investing in their human capital and skilling their human capital? And another question that we want to ask is, if technology is so widely available, why does it, seem to transfer to the rest of the world so slowly? And when I say the rest of the world, I mean, why does it transfer to the poor countries so slowly? Why does it take almost 3 or 4 years for us to get that new technology? When the computers were introduced in Africa, I don't know, in Zimbabwe, they had already been in the developed countries for a while by the time we got it. When we got cell phones, they had already been introduced and been used in the developed countries. So why is it taking so long for these technologies to transfer down to the poor countries, right? So to answer the first question as to why advanced economies are spending a lot of time in upskilling their people, it's necessary. So for economies to use the technology that they are creating, you need to have the necessary skills in place. And for technology, for this imported technology, or for these developed economies to want to come and invest in your economy, to open a factory maybe in your economy, your labor needs to have the necessary skills in place. So if you think of your multinational companies that invest in South Africa, maybe like if you think of BMW, your car manufacturers, the reason they invest in this country is because the labor is skilled to work in the car manufacturing industry, right? So you need to have the necessary skills for these companies to be incentivized to want to set up base in your economy. If you don't have, they're going to go elsewhere. They're going to go to a place where there is the skills in the economy. And second, the other issue is that technology transfer, this diffusion of technology from developed countries to poor countries, raises the issue of institutions, your property rights. Developed economies tend to create technologies for their labor, and their labor is already skilled, so they have high skilled labor in mind. And that means developing economies where we tend to have low skilled labor or medium skilled labor, and we are not that strict on implementing our property rights, right? Our intellectual property rights, we already had this discussion. Well, it means that we can only imitate those technologies. So we don't actually get to use or to harness the full returns of the potential of this technology when we import it.
Yes, another point that maybe we should also consider is that in these developed economies, even if they see a skill right in Africa, they can always use higher level of pay to attract that level of skill so that skill can leave that developing country to the developed world. That is the reason why maybe in the developing economies we find it difficult to navigate quicker into their status as well. Maybe
Yes.
that could be the cause.
Yeah, exactly. So that model also explains why you have skilled labor migrating from developing economies to developed economies, right? That's also one of the reasons they're saying that. And they also say even sometimes your unskilled labor, which should not be the case, because they're saying that in developing economies, if skilled labor is a scarce resource, then the returns of skilled labor should be high, which means the wages should be higher. And yet we still have skilled labor preferring to leave the home country to go to a developed country. And one of the reasons is that, we, as poor countries, we are not able to compensate our skilled labor at the right rate. And so they will go to where they will get the correct compensation for their skills. Yes.
I think what is of importance as well is to recognize the importance of institutions in terms of organizing the resources, in this case, the labor and capital. For instance, in China, for long, the reason why most companies set their manufacturing bases there was because of cheap labor for a long period of time. But in recent years, that is no longer the case. They are setting base there because of the concentration of the skill level and accessibility of those skills. They are so readily available and in abundance for them to actually utilize them. That even, and Elon Musk has set up a gigafactory. One of his biggest Tesla factories is in China because the institutional infrastructure there, including the human capital investments into the labor, is such that the infrastructure is able to organize it much more better, efficiently. And if we move another case, we look at in San Francisco, California, Silicon Valley.
Yes, it's Silicon Valley.
In Silicon Valley, you've got the best minds in the technical world. Because of the financial infrastructure when you are in Silicon Valley. If you bet an idea in that space, you can have 10 people vouching to take your idea and turn it into something productive.
Yes.
And that has something to do with institutional infrastructure, including the universities. Facebook was born in a residence of students, and many more ideas were born out of students writing their PhD papers, including your Reddit, I think, Quora as well, and a lot more technologies. So you look at the place of the institutions, including academic institutions, in the way in which they are able to attract best minds and organize them. So my submission is institutions, or the role of institutions is not just to strengthen what exists, but also to organize it.
Yes.
So you may find you've got human capital, you've got labor, you've got everything, but you do not have an institutional infrastructure to organize all of these people in the same place so that they can come up with innovative ideas.
And be productive, yeah, and be productive, exactly. Cohesion is what the institutions, and that's when we discuss institutions tomorrow, it's part of the definition of why institutions are important, actually. And also to add to that, so I wanted to give an example, right? The World Trade Organization. So developing economies that want, or developing countries that want to be part of the World Trade Organization, they need to meet the requirements of the trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights. So they call it TRIPS, right? So you need to meet these regulations if you want to be part of the World Trade Organization. The developed economies within World Trade Organizations, they strongly advocate for TRIPS. Why? Because it protects their ideas from developing countries. But the developing countries, they are not so much in favor, they're concerned about the regulations of, or the requirements from this intellectual property rights in World Trade Organization, because they feel that it hampers their ability to easily adopt these technologies from developed economies, right? So that's their concern. It's not that they don't want to implement or to adhere to these intellectual property rights, but as I think someone mentioned it, there's a bit of stifling that happens. And the developing economies, they have realized this, and they've been pushing back, saying, okay, is there a way that we can gain access to these technologies quicker or earlier than having to wait maybe till the patent is over, or or the copyrights, or having to pay hefty fines, hefty costs to use the technologies, right? So the developed economies are saying, we will help you with technologies, but you need to adhere to intellectual property rights, and we are the ones who hold the intellectual property rights. And they're saying that if you, the developing countries, are willing to implement and commit to protection of copyrights, then maybe we will start creating technologies that are relevant for the type of skill that you have. Because if you are not adhering to intellectual property rights, we will continue creating technologies that our advanced people can use, which means that when you guys get the technology, you won't really get the full returns because you don't really know how to use it. It will just so the returns, you won't use the full potential of that technology. And the relevance of this IPR discussion was brought to the forefront during the COVID-19, right, pandemic. So many developing countries, they wanted to imitate the COVID-19 vaccine, but the IPR lies with the companies in developed economies. So Pfizer has got an IPR, a patent, on the COVID-19, and they have made billions from the COVID-19 vaccine, and they are projecting that they're going to continue making money for the next strains of vaccines they have to in preparation of the, to keep the COVID-19 at bay, right? So South Africa and India proposed, and I will put it in the Google folder, they proposed a waiver on the IPR for vaccines. And quite a number of countries joined in, and they said it was a good idea, we'll support it. But European Union and some other developed economies, they voted against it. They vetoed it. So it hasn't yet been, the waiver hasn't gone through. It was, I think, in 2020. The document came out in 2020. And the outcome was that Kenya, Eswatini joined South Africa and India to become official co-sponsors to the proposal, and nearly 100 countries welcomed and showed support overall for the waiver, while 9 World Trade Organization members, including the European Union, they did not support the proposal. And they did not support the proposal on the ground that it will disincentivize their firms to develop the next generation vaccine against future variants of the virus. So they said, if the waiver goes through, big pharmaceutical companies like Pfizer, where they are able to charge that price is greater than marginal cost so that they can get their profits, it will be a disincentive to them. Because then why would they continue producing this, investing so much in this, in the vaccine, if everyone else has now got access to the blueprint? Yes.
I think in addition to that, most of people don't know about this, the significance of the fact that there's a consortium of researchers in the world based at Brett University who discovered the first vaccine for COVID-19.
Yes.
However, it goes back to what I was saying. Even the World Trade Organization was onto that. There was no infrastructure to capitalize in terms of, because we need trials, and those things are hectic.
And very hectic.
There are a lot of concerns concerning, you can't use human as trials, and if you use animals, there's a lot of license, there's a lot of process. In other words, which is costly. In other words, there is no institutional infrastructure to process a health idea into that. As we speak now, there's a doctor now in KZN who has discovered a potential vaccine for HIV. Now, as we speak today, in the University of KwaZulu-Natal. However, it's not going to fly because there is no institutional infrastructure that is able to support that and ensure that that is able to be expedited and is able to connect to the best minds and bring it through. With that, that's one. A lot of things happened there, but a lot of Western pharmaceuticals sent experts and moved in quickly. So we may never know whether took an idea of that from those researchers and took it. It's possible that Pfizer took that idea from South Africa and capitalized on it and made.
Yeah, there is that debate actually that's going on about the COVID-19 vaccine, and that South Africa was at the cutting edge of being involved in the discovery of this vaccine. But it also links to what we were discussing about Nkosana Makate, that because there are no institutional frameworks, no one is going to protect the inventor. You know, that doctor at UKZN who came up with that novel idea. And, you know, is he then going to be willing to share that idea? Obviously not, you know, because he needs to know that he's going to be compensated for being the one who came up with this groundbreaking vaccine or cure for a pandemic that has, you know, ravaged the world for many years now. Yeah, that is very interesting. Okay, so in essence, to get a more holistic understanding of economic growth differences, basically what it means is that all these growth models, for us to understand how these factors work to produce output, we need to look at the institutions in these countries, right? Because the policies and the choices that particular societies are making to increase investments in skill accumulation or education, they can have profound impact on the steady state of an economy. So this is what we're going to be discussing tomorrow, is now the institutions, because I think right from day one, that has been a constant key element that keeps coming back, is political will, the policies that are in place, the incentives that are being created within developing versus developed countries. So this is what we want to discuss. This is what I want to discuss with us tomorrow for our final content day. And then Thursday, we're going to have our data practical, and then Friday will be your day as well. So, yeah. So if we have any questions or further discussions about these growth models today, we can continue. Otherwise, we can meet again tomorrow. And I think there's tea. before you leave, there's tea and coffee and a bit of eats. Yeah. So yeah. Where are we headed, guys? Where are we headed with our with our continent?
I was going to say that, about the HIV vaccine. We have institutions that are dedicated to HIV and AIDS.
Yeah.
People are being employed. I mean, who's going to be willing to let that go?
Yeah.
Should that be successful? Maybe thousands, millions people who are dependent on HIV is employment as much as it is a menace.
I mean, if this doctor, wow, if that was to come out, I can guarantee you Western influence will be here knocking the very next day for his idea. And he will have so many pharmaceutical companies that want to invest in his. But then we need to keep that talent and we need to invest in his idea. But like you were saying, the capacity, resources, institutional capacity. Yes, sir.
Yes, for me, like I believe now, things are turning around. People can check following the development direction by Donald Trump to cut even the funding, the aid into South African, health system and a number of tariffs across the globe. I think USA is going to lose that level of influence across the globe. And if you can check what is happening across the African countries, we've got leaders now waking up and standing for their part. And that, I think, those developments, they are changing patterns, and that's going to help us maybe to utilize our resources within our continent. And I think the world's changing.
I think it's a wake-up call for everyone, right? As much as we may not agree with some of Trump's, decisions and everything, but he's rattling people and he's making countries realize that, okay, we need to have a contingency plan here. I mean, the European Union, the way they quickly came together and they were like, you guys, we need to sort ourselves out here just in case this man decides he's not interested in the European Union. We won't have any aid or, any networks there. So let's make sure that we sort ourselves out. We need to be doing the same thing as well.
Another point is even within the domestic, like even in our country. Like I'm very happy about that. Not happy about the GNU per se, but I'm happy that there's no one that has majority. That means there's no one that can detect the direction. You see, a lot has come up since the GNU. Just you get to notice, some inconsistencies, some flaw. There's a lot happening. That's what I can tell. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I would like to agree with him on some of the policies being a wake-up call for the government. Because when the US stop order happened, I think most of the governments realized that they were not really putting much focus on the HIV programs. And they started advocating for that to increase funding in these programs. Because I remember, for example, in Malawi, the government was putting something like less than 1% into the HIV programs. But when the funding was cut, the ministry started having meetings with the Ministry of Finance so that they can increase the budget towards these programs. But it's just unfortunate that maybe this is happening now. But once we have stopped talking about the stop orders, stopped talking about the funding decline, the government will go back again to where we were and forget about this whole issue and the importance of investing in these important programs. So maybe we should just keep the momentum going on.
And to add to that, I saw the two hands. To add to that, it also comes back to, I'm thinking about what we were talking about, the trust issue. And that now that governments are realizing that, okay, we need to actually internalize our growth and start, advocating for people to fund and to help fund some of these health projects. but your people have lost trust in you. The integrity of the government is so debilitated. It's so rotten that people don't trust when the government actually comes and says, okay, guys, we need to work together to build our country. People are like, yeah, right. I'm like, so now the trust becomes an issue, right? So now it's for our governments to build that trust. They have to rebuild that trust with their citizens. And how they're going to go about it is going to be interesting. Yes, sir.
Okay. I read that paper you sent, Prof, on gunpowder.
Yeah.
Very interesting. It made me to think about a lot of things, and also depressed me on the other hand, because the perspectives and insights I got from it made me to think, I think this will be related a lot to what you ended with, which is technology transfer. Firstly, I think South Africa, I don't know if in the world there's a country like this one, trust me. In terms of the potential that we can tap into if we get right leadership.
Oh, yes.
One, we underestimate what it takes to invest in human capital and what it takes to build institutions that will be able to have a culture and a value system that will be able to keep in check, like be trusted by the people and be able to work for everyone. We see this once, for instance, a population loses trust in the judiciary, it will never gain it back in a generation or even two. So most South African institutions are so old that they are able to hold for longer. For instance, if you look at the Reserve Bank when we first had it, if you look at when we had the current financial system in place, so to innovate on something that has been there for that long is easier. That's why even when we speak of land and everything, I always ask myself, do you think you'll just take out people who have been farming for more than 400 years out of farms and be food secure, and you put people who barely have 30 years doing anything that has to do with land, and you think you'll be secure? It's just stupid to even think of it. So I think it's the underestimating what it takes to build, basically. So I think when I was reading that paper and I looked at Africa and South Africa, firstly, in South Africa, we received a steam train in the 1800s, 60 years after it was developed. We are looking at the pace as you were.
Yes.
60 years.
Yeah.
And there's a paper, an economic history paper I read back then, which was trying to understand how far are we now. And he was saying we are still in the equivalent of that technologically, meaning the diffusion of technology to South Africa with that infrastructure and everything I've mentioned is still very, very slow. That is the first. But also on the frontier, technological frontier, which you mentioned, let us look at things that matter the most in terms of the technological frontier. The first one, we would look at softwares, computing systems, etc. We don't feature. We are not anywhere close. We had Mark Sutherworth and friends called South Africans,
Yes.
who developed Ubuntu, a software which was so forward-thinking at the time. It went to be Oracle in America and became everything else.
Wow.
If you look at the cabal close to Trump, including Elon Musk, it's three of them, South African guys, who could not take their ideas off in South Africa. In the 2000s, South Africa was developing an electric car, early 2000s. Look that up now as I speak.
Yeah.
It's called Joule. Then Elon Musk, as students and these other guys, were part of that as well, that thing. But it never took off anywhere. With this pandemic, the vaccine, We only had 10 million to give to them. What are you going to do with 10 million developing a vaccine for a pandemic such as that? That is the first. But what is the second one? The space race. Which African country is featuring in this space race? Who is there? No one is there. And we know the potential in that space race. We know what they're doing. No one is even speaking about it. It's like we are dead on
Yes.
it. The final one is AI.
Yeah.
AI. I mean, we are not appearing there too. So what I'm trying to draw our attention to is, when you look at the technological frontier, we are not pushing anything. And we are not even close to that. But with that being said, South Africa has these pockets called the dual economy. It has these pockets of small things. For instance, if you look back then, the first heart transplant was here. You've got many firsts in South Africa, and innovations, etc. But we are not capitalizing. That's the lack I'm speaking to. I'm saying if we could look at these things we have potential in doing and then focus on them, we could.
No, I definitely agree with you that South Africa has got a lot of potential to become, one of the biggest economies in the world. And if South Africa was to, if the institutions were to be put in place that are conducive for growth, there are going to be spillovers, and you'll be able to draw your neighbors to also, or to get your neighbors to toe the line. And then you just start. It just starts like that. I mean, that's how it started in Europe, right? It was one country that said, you guys towed the line, and then they all started following with implementing good institutions, with making sure that they were investing. And now you've got this European Union. It's the same thing. We can do that. We need just one country to show us how it's done and to be strong enough to say, okay, now everybody toe the line. It starts in Southern Africa. It starts spreading to the rest of the continent. There is great potential, not only in South Africa, but in the continent. And we have the human capital. Yeah. No, Africa has got a very interesting history. So tomorrow, we'll start with current institutions, and then we are going to dig into the historical institutions and how those historical institutions, the effects of those historical institutions appear to have persisted to current times, and how they are still being observed in Africa's development trajectory, right? And this is exactly what you are saying, that it's so hard to disentangle some of these historical events that came and implemented institutions, and also remember that when they left, the colonizers left. This was after a war. They were poor. They didn't have the resources anymore to take care of their colonies. So they just said, you know what, fine, you want your independence, here, go, right? Nothing was transferred. No knowledge of how you were running the system was transferred. These are people that took over what they had been observing, and for some countries, that type of leadership has remained. But then dynamics have changed, right? You're no longer leading an oppressed people. These are people that you grew up with, people that know you, so they are going to fight you. Whereas before, we would keep quiet and say, oh, okay, these are the ones with the power to withhold investments if we come out too strongly. It happened with Haiti. Haiti came out strongly against French colonization. None of the colonies supported Haiti. None of the colonizing countries supported Haiti. They were the first country to get their independence from their colonizer, but they are one of the poorest countries in the world because they didn't get the support. And in fact, they then had to pay compensation to the colonizers for their lost income from extraction of resources. And you know what? They paid. Why are you paying? They paid. you know, but at the time, again, there's politics involved, right? Maybe they had no choice but to pay. How would Africa look like today if it hadn't been colonized? But maybe the question we need to ask is, well, how would Western Europe look like if they hadn't been able to colonize Africa? Would they be as wealthy? All right. We'll see each other tomorrow.